Welcome to the Gray Path Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony B. Today, we are going to talk about something that I myself struggle with a lot, and I really think is worth exploring, and that's this concept of impermanence. So, we're going to discuss the doctrine of impermanence, which is a doctrine in Buddhism, and we're going to discuss that in relation to the Jedi Order as a whole. So we're going to dive right in here. So we're going to focus on the Jedi's rules, if you will, on attachment and their teachings on why attachment is forbidden, why it's not just frowned upon, but it's just straight up forbidden. This all builds off of the Buddhist doctrine, if you will, of impermanence. And this appears in the Pali Canon as one of the essential doctrines of Buddhism, not just the philosophy, but the religion of it. Now, this concept of this doctrine of impermanence, it basically says this: all conditional existence, without exception, is transient, evanescent, and inconsistent. And what it's talking about is that all temporal things, whether material, as in physical items, or mental, as in thoughts, are compounded objects in a continuous change of condition, and that they are subject to decline and destruction. Now, that's a lot of big words. And what it's talking about is this concept that everything has a beginning, a middle, and most importantly, an end. Nothing is permanent. Everything passes. And why this is important, we're going to get into in relation to the Jedi Order, but I want to dig a little bit here into those three things that it talks about: transient, evanescent, and inconsistent. By transient, it means that everything only lasts for a short amount of time, that everything is impermanent, hence the doctrine of impermanence. So it's talking about physical items, thoughts, relationships. These things are all things that exist only for a short period of time. Now, this could be friendships, this could be relationships, this could be animals, this could be thoughts. These things are only around for a short period of time. Next, we're going to discuss evanescent. What does it mean? Well, it means that soon everything will pass out of sight, memory, or existence, that everything is quickly fading or disappearing. And again, we're going to dive into a lot more of what this means. I just kind of want to set out the basic premise first. And then finally, inconsistent, frequently changing, or variable or irregular. And what that means is that the present as it exists, which is really the only thing that we actually experience. We don't experience the past. We don't experience the future. We only experience the present. And the present lasts for a short period of time. It soon passes out of sight, memory, or of existence, and it's frequently changing. And that's important to understand. And like, we're going to flow this episode as we do normal. So we're going to get into some stories first, and then we're going to really kind of draw upon those lessons and how they're applicable to real life when we get to the end. So it's just important to understand as we talk about this, that physical and mental events are not metaphysically real. They're not constant. They're not permanent. They come into being and then they dissolve. And keep this in mind as we discuss this through the lens of the Jedi Order. Now, the Jedi Order, of course, it is fictional, but pretty much everything we talk about on this show is a fictional world where there's lessons for us to draw upon. So the Jedi Order, when George Lucas built it, it draws a lot of inspiration from Buddhism. Specifically for the Jedi, you've got these situations where, so in a nutshell, let's just talk about what the Jedi Code does and does not allow. So the Jedi Code forbids possession and attachments. The Jedi themselves, they're trained and encouraged to love things, but to not feel possessive and not to gain attachments. Attachment was to the Jedi Order. This concept of attachment is the inability to accept change as the fundamental characteristic of life. That means an inability to accept that death is a natural part of life. And most importantly, an inability to let go. It feeds into fear, it feeds into loss, it feeds into greed. That transitions into jealousy. Attachment is viewed as this selfish act. I mean, how dare you hold on to something that is fleeting and inconsistent and will just come into being and then naturally fade out? It to the Jedi, they believe that this concept of possession and attachment, the possession and attachment, was a shadow of greed, and to them, thus, the path to the dark side. Now, of course, I don't view the dark side as evil. I don't view the light side as good. I think they're just different aspects of the full spectrum of the Force. That's just my personal opinion. I think that they each have a role. They each have things that they can draw upon. And I think that trying to say one is better than the other is pretty stupid. I think you're denying the existence and the usefulness of one whole aspect of the Force because you're focused on another. So in the Jedi Order, attachment was forbidden. They weren't allowed to be attached. That's why Jedi, at least in the old order, Jedi didn't have wives, with a few exceptions. Ki-Adi-Mundi, because his race doesn't reproduce very quickly, he was allowed to have a wife, just because his race needed it for perpetualization. But attachments themselves were just straight up forbidden. They weren't allowed to have attachments. I mean, one of Master Yoda's biggest or most popular quotes, if you will, is learn to let go of everything you fear to lose. And what he's talking about in there, he's not saying that you need to live this monastic life where everybody just, you live in a vow of poverty and you suffer. That's not what he's talking about. He's trying to talk about this concept of, if you love something, and the Jedi are encouraged to love. If you love something, then you are encouraged to experience that love, to care, to have that compassion, but you're not supposed to view it as something, as an attachment, because an attachment is something you're going to want to hold on to. And if you're holding on to these things, then you're going to run into a problem, because life is fleeting. This doctrine of impermanence exists. Relationships come and they go, thoughts come and they go, physical objects appear and break down in time. If you become attached to these things, you're going against the natural order. And that's what leads to feelings of jealousy. So case in point, Jedi are forbidden to have relationships because look at what happened with Anakin. Anakin had Padme, and then he became jealous of anyone who showed Padme attention. And what did? He began to fear to lose Padme. And we all saw what that did. So that's why when Master Yoda says, learn to let go of everything you fear to lose, he's not saying that you're not supposed to care about it. It's that you need to learn to embrace the fact that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you deny the transiency of life, then you are going to doom yourself to these negative emotions, which they believe led to the dark side, which in their dogmatic view was evil. So the Jedi were taught, be compassionate, be loving, be caring, but don't hold on and be possessive of these things. You can't try to keep something frozen in time. It's just not the way. Life in its natural state is transitional. It begins and it ends. And this is a very powerful lesson, not only in keeping the Jedi on the right track and keeping them from going all, crazy and they're trying to kill stuff. And we all saw what happened to Anakin. It wasn't good. But it also teaches them on how to survive in the world as it is. I mean, it's nice to think that you could hold on to a moment forever, but that rarely ever happens. So when Master Yoda says, learn to let go of everything you fear to lose, what he's trying to say is learn to accept life the way life actually is. And it's just not this permanent thing that always exists. That's just not the way life is. And to think it's that way is to deny life in all of its natural form. And it leads to these negative feelings. It leads you trying to hold on to something. It's kind of like reaching your hand in with your fingers wide and you're trying to grab water, or you're trying to grab sand and everything just slips between your fingers. And that's what he's getting at, is you just can't hold on to it because it's going to slip through your fingers regardless. So instead of feeling hurt and alone and angry and jealous and enraged and all these negative feelings for trying to hold on to something that by nature is going to slip through your fingers, you just need to accept it as it is. So to kind of wrap up the concept of what the Jedi had, they really learned to love the totality of life, and they learned to love it in an unconditional manner, because by putting conditions on life, something that is transitional, something that's constantly in flux, they're trying to control something that they really have no place in trying to control. So they were taught to love unconditionally. They were taught to really enjoy life for its transitional nature. And they were taught to do this without selectively choosing individual life forms or objects to become selfishly attached to. And that is important, because we're going to discuss 3 different situations, 2 in which Jedi failed to live up to this aspect of their code, and 1 where it succeeded, but at a terrible cost. So we're going to start with probably what's, the most famous of this, which is, of course, Anakin Skywalker. And we're going to focus on his relationship with Padme, as well as his relationship with his mother. Now, some of this I've discussed in previous episodes. I think the Jedi Order itself is to blame for Anakin destroying it. I think they were stupid in what they did. I think they were not realistic in thinking they were going to be able to take a 9-year-old boy away from the only thing he knew, leave his mom in slavery, and somehow this kid's just going to forget about everything that's been going on. So, but let's start with his mom. So they took Anakin, we all know the story, and if not, I'll do a quick recap here. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi find Anakin on Tatooine. Qui-Gon senses that there's something special about him. He wins his freedom from Watto, and he leaves Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mom. He just leaves her on Tatooine in slavery. Qui-Gon dies in his duel with Darth Maul, so Obi-Wan, out of duty, decides to train Anakin because that's what Qui-Gon wanted. So the Jedi Order, first they said, no, Anakin can't train. And that was probably the smart move, because they sensed all the hesitation and the fear and the attachment that was in him. But they let him do it anyway, because Obi-Wan was like, look, I'm going to train him regardless. So they said, okay, fuck it. We'd rather you smoke in the house where we can see you than smoke where it's not safe. And that entire concept. So Obi-Wan trains Anakin. And the truth of the matter is as great as Obi-Wan eventually becomes, he was pretty much training Anakin from the moment he himself became a Jedi Knight. He didn't have the experience to really take on a Padawan, and he shouldn't have taken one on. So Anakin's walking around life with this attachment to his mom. He loves his mom. He's selfishly attached to his mom, and understandably so. Well, what happens when he once he gets plagued by these nightmares of his mom dying? What's he do? He drops his mission entirely and goes and chases after where his mom's at so he can try to save her. And what's that end up doing? He ends up slaughtering an entire village of Tusken Raiders, the women and the children. And it's kind of starts his eventual descent into the dark side. And it also opens him up to manipulation from Palpatine. But probably the area where Anakin boldface fails to follow the Doctrine of Impermanence and really kind of sets the stage for the destruction of the Jedi is his relationship with Padme. And there's so many ways that the Jedi Order, and I know I've discussed this in previous episodes, there's so many ways the Jedi Order could have done this differently. When Obi-Wan and Anakin are assigned to meet up with Padme on Coruscant, which is at the beginning of Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan can tell without a shadow of a doubt that Anakin still has very non-Jedi feelings for Padme. Like, it's clear. I mean, he's flustered, he's blushing, he's clearly in love with this girl. So instead of doing what he should have done, and Obi-Wan should have gone to the council and said, hey, we can't do this. I understand that Senator Amidala is asking for us because she knows us. We can't do this because Anakin's got a big old crush on her. Instead, Obi-Wan fails as a master, and the council fails in properly. Basically, it's like removing the temptation, if you will. They should have just removed the temptation by assigning Anakin elsewhere. And had they done that, a lot of stuff would have been different. Chances are Anakin would have probably never really fallen to the dark side. I mean, maybe Palpatine's a pretty good manipulator, but they should have seen what happened and they didn't. So he's allowed to be around her. They go on an adventure, which is pretty much the entirety of Attack of the Clones. And what happens at the end of it? They end up secretly getting married. And then they have this whole marriage in secret, which again, I don't understand how Obi-Wan couldn't have been aware of it, or Yoda, or anyone. I mean, perhaps it was the dark side muddling the Force, like clouding the Force, but I really don't understand how they couldn't have caught on to it. Anakin's not exactly the greatest like actor, if you will, or hider of things. So he gets attached. I mean, it's straight up. He not only becomes attached to Padme, his whole world centers around Padme. And then that means he starts fearing losing her. And his whole reason for siding with Sidious is he was afraid of losing Padme. He could not come to terms with the fact that life has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And he wanted to make sure that life didn't have an end. And it was this refusal to accept nature as it is that eventually led Anakin to kill Mace Windu, or well, he didn't kill him, but chop his hand off, create the opening for the Emperor to kill Windu. On a side note, I'm still not totally convinced Windu's dead, but that whole thing comes because he can't live without Padme. So he's willing to kill the entire Jedi Order. He's willing to turn on everybody who knew and everyone he loves to save the woman he loves. But then it just becomes a slippery slope. Because then when he's on Mustafar and Padme shows up, Anakin is so, at this point, he's so torn up by the killing and all of the bad shit that he himself has done that he ends up almost killing the very person that he was trying to save. I mean, there's the scene where, he yells at her, you brought him to me, you betrayed me. And she's like, no shit, I didn't know he was on the ship. And she's referring to Obi-Wan. And Anakin starts force choking her, and it's just Obi-Wan saying, knock it off. And he finally stops. But if Obi-Wan wouldn't have been there, he was so driven by rage and hate and hated himself for everything that he had done up to this point, he would have killed the very person that he claimed to be doing this all for. So that's our example number one of a Jedi who just straight up failed to follow this and how bad things happened. The next story is probably a little lesser known, and it does draw upon the books, the expanded universe, specifically a book called Shatterpoint, and is also referenced in the Revenge of the Sith book. So we're going to focus a little bit of a story here on Mace Windu, the most badass motherfucker in the galaxy. I love Mace Windu. Really good if you enjoy the character, even if you didn't particularly care for like Samuel L. Jackson's like playing of him, which I don't know how you couldn't, but if for some reason you want to see more Mace Windu, there was a micro series called the Micro Series that came out of the Clone Wars before it became the Dave Filoni big cartoon or like CGI cartoon. There was an actual cartoon series which was drawn by the same guy, I think it's Andy D, who does Samurai Jack. I only know this because an ex-girlfriend of mine, like way back in college, bought me a signed Andy D art book. Not only is it signed, there's like a custom drawing in it, but he did a lot of the artwork for this micro series of the Clone Wars, and it's fantastic. It's the series that introduced General Grievous as the badass he really was, but there's also an episode of Mace Windu in there where you get to really see how powerful Windu is. Anyway, what a lot of people don't know about Mace Windu is he's not only incredibly powerful in the Force and a top-notch swordsman, he created his own style of lightsaber combat called Vapad, and it's his own style. There's technically never been two people who have mastered it. What it does is Mace Windu's got an anger problem, and he designed a style that allows him to skirt the line between the light and the dark. Like he kind of dips his toe into the dark side a little bit in the way this style is. And it's a way of him being able to manage his own anger. He doesn't teach it to people because if you would master it and you didn't have control of your emotions, it could easily lead into a dark side transition. So most people know all that about him. Obviously, he wields a purple lightsaber. which behind the scenes, the whole reason he wields the purple lightsaber is Samuel L. Jackson wanted his own color so that in the Geonosis Coliseum scene, people would be able to see where he's at, because you see all these lightsabers everywhere and they're all blue and green. Well, you're going to see one purple one stand out. So that's why it's purple. It was a request by Samuel L. Jackson. And of course, I love it because it's amethyst and it fits perfectly well for his character that kind of skirts a little bit on the dark side. So anyway, all of this leads to one thing most people don't know about Mace Windu is he has a very unique force ability called the Shatterpoint. He sees the world around him as like a crystal, and he can see the lines in the crystal, and he can see what are called shatter points, which are these convergence between people, events, all this kind of stuff. He can see these convergences, and he understands how events need to take place. And depending on how an event takes place at a shatter point, it can change everything. So he has a very unique understanding of how the world fits together because of this gift he has in the Force. And in particularly the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which again, I've gushed about repeatedly. If you haven't read it, pick it up. You will not be disappointed. But in there, it talks about secretly, Mace Windu was also someone who broke the Doctrine of Impermanence, because Mace Windu fell in love. But what Mace Windu fell in love with was the concept of the Republic. He fell in love with the Republic. He loved the Republic, from the law to the system of government to he loved it. He loved it so much that he feared losing it. And why that's important is that's what drives him when he goes with Ki-Adi-Mundi, Kit Fisto, and Saucy Tin to confront Palpatine in Palpatine's office right after. So if you've watched Revenge of the Sith, that scene where Anakin goes and tells him, look, I just discovered Palpatine's the Sith Lord. In the movie, they do, of course, the movie kind of ham-fist everything. But in the movie, obviously, see like this shocked look on Mace Windu's face, and then you kind of fast forward to him gathering some people, and they go to confront Palpatine. The book, of course, is way more nuanced and fills in a lot of the details. But what it talks about in there is when Anakin is telling him this, it's like a light bulb just clicks in his brain, because he always understood that there was a shatter point where Anakin and Palpatine converged. And he always knew that their relationship was a shatter point, but he never understood what direction or why it was a shatter point. He didn't understand why it was a shatter point. Well, when he finds out that Palpatine is the Sith Lord, he then realizes, oh, it's the shatter point because their relationship can potentially change everything. But most importantly, when Anakin tells him Palpatine's the Sith Lord, he realizes, one, how fucking blind he's been. He never realized it. And two, he realizes how much in danger his beloved Republic is. And that makes him act rashly. So he was smart in the sense that he gets Saucy Tin, Agen Kolar, and Kit Fisto, because they are three of the probably, because Yoda was on Kashyyyk at the time. So they're probably the three best swordsmen in the order outside of Mace and Yoda. And they happen to be on Coruscant. So he gets them all. That's 4 Jedi Masters. I don't know if Agen Kolar was a Jedi Master. I don't know. But anyways, at least 4 really powerful Jedi who are incredible swordsmen. And they go and they confront Palpatine. And again, Mace at this point is afraid that his beloved Republic is going to die. So he's acting rashly. I mean, he could have brought a whole bunch of clone troopers with him. There's a ton of things he could have done, but he acted rashly because the thing he loved, he now realized was in the greatest terror or greatest trouble. It was in a very precarious situation. So he acts rashly. He acts almost without thought, if you will. And then, of course, there's the fight in Palpatine's office. Now, in the movie, again, real ham-fisted, shitty, fight, because first of all, one of the 2 reasons that it was such a shitty fight is, one, they kind of sped through. So like Palpatine does that stupid corkscrew like fly. But the real big reason on why it was kind of a letdown of a fight is because George Lucas wanted Samuel L. Jackson and he wanted Ian McDiarmid, who plays Palpatine, and Samuel Jackson obviously plays Mace Windu. He wanted to do a lot of close-ups of them, which means their stunt actors couldn't do it. And they never took the time to train Ian McDiarmid. They never took the time to train Samuel Jackson to be like they trained the actors who played Obi-Wan and Anakin. So they didn't really know how to use a saber well. So it's why you get a really shitty, like if you look from the choreography, it's a terrible fight on film. Terrible fight. In fact, because of that fight, it kind of coined what we in Saber School call the Crazy Uncle Palpatine thrust. Because if you watch Ian McDiarmid in it, and anyone watching the video episode will see, there's constantly like it's like 4 times in this fight where you see Ian McDiarmid do this crazy fucking, and he has this like real elbow high, like crazy over exaggerated thrust forward, and he always is like, and he has almost like these, like it looks like he's orgasming when he does it. It's fucking ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that literally it is the name of a move that we talk about in Saber School regularly. Oh, we need to do a Crazy Uncle Palpatine, thrust here. In the book, and again, can't gush about this book enough, it is one of the most badass scenes you'll ever fucking read. So in the movie, he, it's treason then, he stands up, it's treason then, and then he does this crazy corkscrew, and in like 2 seconds, 2 of the Jedi fall, and you see him, so he drops Saucy Tin and Aegon Kohler like that, literally within like a second, he drops them in the movie. And you don't really see what he does, you just see kind of corkscrews and then they fall, and then you see him fighting Mace Windu and Kit Fisto out a door, and then it goes to a different scene. In the book, it's so fucking badass. So in the book, they walk in, and it makes a point of saying that the moment they walk in, he turns on a recorder. And the Matthew Stover, I believe that's the guy who wrote it, did such an amazing job, because part of that scene is almost written as if you're reading a transcript. So what Palpatine was doing, and why it was so cool in the book, is as soon as they walk into his office, he turns on a hidden recorder. And if you listen to the words he uses in the movie, he uses the same words in the movie, but you don't know he's recording it. So he kind of plays innocent, like, "Oh no, Master Jedi, why are you here?" And they're like, "We're here to arrest you." "Oh no, you can't do that. I've done nothing wrong." And they come out and they they're like, "Oh, we're going to take you down, blah, 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 blah." Well, so all of that still happens in the book. But then when Palpatine stands up, he force calls. So he hid his lightsaber in a statue. Well, he activates his lightsaber remotely and draws it to him. And right as he does it, he slams his saber blade down right through his desk, severing and damaging the recorder, thus turning it off. And as he's doing that, he's continuing to like vocalize as if he's a victim. So of course the Jedi are like, "What the fuck's going on here?" Because here's Palpatine clearly just drew a lightsaber out of like thin air, and he's still saying, "Oh no, don't do it, don't." And he drives it through the table, and he looks up and he goes, "That's enough of that." And this is such a badass scene, even just thinking about it. So then as he's standing there, he looks up and he's like, I'm not, how did he put it? He's like, "I'm not the Jedi, or I'm not the Sith Lord." And he goes, "Master Tin," referring to Saucy Tin. "Master Tin, you're the telepath. What am I thinking?" So Saucy Tin, his race is telepathic. They have the ability to read minds. But Palpatine wasn't stupid. He realized that in order to read minds, you got to concentrate. So Saucy Tin, if you're watching the movie, is the guy who's got the big curved horns that kind of come down from the side of his head down to his jaw. So in the book, Saucy Tin's, all of their blades up, like the lightsabers up. Well, the tip of his blade drops just maybe 2 inches as he cocks his head so he can access his telepathic ability and read Palpatine's mind. The moment he does that, they describe it as Palpatine is like a shadow. So like all of a sudden the shadow just leaps from across the table and whoop, cuts Saucy Tin's head right off. Then he like gets behind Aegon Kohler, and Aegon Kohler is the guy with the little, he's Darth Maul's race. So he's got the little spiky horns on his head. Comes up behind him, kills him, blade right through his sternum. And then he fights Kit Fisto and Mace Windu. And then even the book jumps to another scene. When they come back, what's really cool, so when they come back, it's Anakin is running through like the Senate offices to try to get to Palpatine so they won't kill him, because he realizes he needs him to figure out how to save Padme. And when he runs through Palpatine's office, he runs past Palpatine's desk, and on Palpatine's desk is the severed head of Kit Fisto. And Kit Fisto's the one with the tentacles who's always smiling. And Fisto still has that stupid grin on his face, but it's cool they don't show it in the movie. You just see that 1 minute Fisto's there, the next he's not. But when they're discussing the battle between Mace Windu and Palpatine, they talk about how Windu is like, I mean, he's holding his own, but Palpatine is like a black hole of death. He's flashing everywhere. He's striking with such power that Windu's never experienced it before. But he talks about how, because of the lightsaber form that Mace Windu practices, Bapod, he becomes more powerful the more someone with dark side energy attacks him, because he basically becomes like a circuit in electricity. So as the dark side is directed at him, he absorbs it and channels it back at them. So that's why whenever he starts besting Palpatine with a lightsaber, Palpatine switches to the lightning. And the reason in the movie you see that the lightning kind of goes onto the blade and then arcs back to Palpatine, well, the movie just does that. It's really fucking stupid. The movie just does it because they're just trying to say he's deflecting it. But in reality, it's because he becomes a circuit to complete because of the way he channels the force through Vapod. He basically creates a circuit. So the more hate and pain that Palpatine zaps him with, he basically just channels it through himself and redirects it right back at Palpatine, which of course hurts Palpatine, makes him more angry, so he charges more, and it just becomes this endless loop where Palpatine's really the only one being hurt. That was a big side story. I just want to tell you guys that story because it's really fun, and again, you should really read that book. But anyway, Windu fails in his role, and he's the second in command of the Jedi Order, and even he has an attachment that he doesn't tell anybody about, and that's his love and his inability to accept that the Republic would eventually rise and fall. He got selfish. He picked something. He said, that's mine, and I don't want it to disappear. And as such, when shit hit the fan, he became possessive. He wasn't thinking clearly. He went against the natural order of things, and we saw what happened. He gets his hand cut off. He gets blasted out a window. So as our last example, before we get into some real world applicability for this, let's talk about a Jedi who succeeded at a great cost. And we're going to talk about Obi-Wan. Specifically, we're going to talk about the scene on Mustafar right after Obi-Wan cuts off Anakin's other arm and takes his leg. So it's right at that scene, which is in both the book and the movie, where Obi-Wan leaps up onto the shore. Anakin's down there still on the little repulsor droid. And Obi-Wan says the famous line, "It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground." And Anakin, "You underestimate my power." Obi-Wan, "Don't do it." Anakin jumps, and zip, 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 there goes the rest of your fucking limbs. And what's he do? He stumbles down into the fire. Now, I think both the book and the movie do a wonderful job here, because Ewan McGregor, the actor who plays Obi-Wan, he really sold that distraught, like, I loved you, Anakin. And that's the thing. Right there, Obi-Wan's talking about he loved him. But the difference between Obi-Wan and Anakin and Mace Windu is Obi-Wan loves Anakin. He loves him. He was a brother to him. But he is a Jedi first and foremost. So what the movie doesn't do, there's one line from the book that the movie doesn't, or it's not even a line. It's just like a thought, because the book, you get to an idea of what's in their head. So it was a thought that went through Obi-Wan's head that obviously isn't vocalized, so you don't see it in the movie. But right after that whole exchange, "I loved you, Anakin. You are my brother." And Anakin comes back, "I hate you." Well, you just see Obi-Wan walk away in the movie. In the book, he talks about how, like, it hurt. Obi-Wan is hurting watching Anakin catch on fire in all this pain and this agony. But at the end of the day, Obi-Wan is a Jedi, and the Jedi do not kill an unarmed foe. And he walks away from Anakin, and he understands that although he loves Anakin, although he cares for Anakin, Anakin was his best friend and his brother, everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And he walks away. He could have coup de grace Anakin, put him out of his misery, but he won't attack an unarmed foe. And he understands that he can love something while foregoing the attachment. And he walks away. And because he walks away, years later, Anakin eventually defeats the Emperor. I mean, not counting the new trilogy where the Emperor comes back, but for all intents and purposes, by not killing Anakin, he sets the stage for the Emperor to finally be defeated. Now, yes, countless people die in between there, so there's all kinds of moral questions and ethical questions that can be asked there. But the point is Obi-Wan showed that you can love and not become attached. So now let's talk about the important stuff. Let's talk about real life applicability and how understanding this doctrine of impermanence can help us in our own lives. Because isn't that kind of why we're all here and we're listening anyway? So I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways. The first one I want to talk about is ways to relieve stress. So I think we all experience stress. I've been experiencing a lot. It's stress leads to a lot of things. And with stress, we're also going to talk about depression, depression and suicide. So when we get stressed, when something's really getting to us, and I'm going to talk about me personally. So my biggest stressors in my life right now are work. I've been working a lot out of town, and it's good money, and it's tough though. I mean, I will regularly do 12 to 16-hour days, and I'll do 3 to 4 of them in a row. And it's a lot. It is a lot, but it needs to get done. I'd say work's one of my big stressors. Officially, I guess as of this upcoming week, I'm going to be homeschooling my son. I have been running him virtual. It's not working out very well at all. He doesn't want to stay focused, which is very frustrating. So I'm going to switch him to a full homeschool where I create the curriculum. But I would say that my son's schooling situation, being a single parent, having a headstrong child, it's difficult. That's probably my biggest stressor. And I guess my third one is a personal relationship that unfortunately didn't work out. And didn't get to remain friends. So, 3 big stressors in my life. And I think, plus we're here in Pennsylvania, Western PA, gray caps starting to fall. Seasonal depression is a big thing up here. So I've been feeling myself depressed a lot recently. Anyone who's listened to the depression episode, I'm pretty open about a lot of that. When I get depressed, I do get suicidal thoughts. I'm not capable of self-termination. So it's never really been anything I'm concerned about. It's just thoughts. And it's good because the way I think of them really kind of plays into the doctrine of impermanence. Because when I get to these thoughts, these bad thoughts, like, you think to yourself, like, God, I could just die. I always know that, like, you know what? I feel like that now, but it's going to pass. It is. It sucks now, but every thought and every physical thing has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's where you need to start thinking about it when you get stressed out. If you're stressed out at work, like, God, work's shitty. I'm working these long hours. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm not making the money I want. Understand that these shitty situations have a beginning, a middle, and end. They're not permanent. And that's so important to understand. And it's hard to keep that perspective because when you're in the shit, when you're in the trenches, it's easy to forget that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This too shall pass. And the doctrine of impermanence is so important. Just think of the Jedi. Nothing is forever. Nothing is permanent. It's going to pass. And I know it seems cliche and hallmarky, but it's so fucking true. When you're depressed, when you're thinking to yourself, God, I just wish I could end it. Just stop for a second and realize, well, yeah, I feel like this right now, but this isn't forever. This is going to pass. And sometimes it's riding the fucking storm out. Find a way to distract yourself. Go talk to a professional. I'm in therapy and I fucking love it. I do. Talking to someone, having someone I can vent to that's not only non-judgmental, but is going to come back and be like, look, let's evaluate. Let's think deeper. Why do you feel this way? Why do you do this? That's great for me. Just understand that when you're having these bad thoughts and these bad feelings, these are not bad thoughts that are always going to be there. There's going to be situations where shitty things are happening, but understand they're not permanent. And it's so important to know that they're not permanent. this too shall pass. So I think one of the best ways to utilize this doctrine of impermanence, this aspect of the Jedi Code, is to understand that it's a way that when shit is bad, it's understanding that it's not permanent, that there is a hill that you'll crest and it will pass. So next way I want to talk about it, and it's important, it's been important in my life, and I think it's important for a lot of people, and that's ways to use the doctrine of impermanence to move on after a breakup or a divorce, or even like the loss of a friend. So one of the ways when you meet people in your life, and I've always thought of it this way, and perhaps this will help some people. I imagine long before I came up with the term the gray path, or even before I conceptualized what the gray path was, I always viewed myself as a solitary traveler on a road. Now, I was really into fantasy fiction as a kid, so that road was always through the woods. And I think we're all on this road, not the same road. We're all on our own road in life, our own path, if you will. And as we travel, we will find that our path intersects sometimes with other people's paths, and we get to walk the path together. But nothing is permanent. And it's very possible that while our paths may intersect for days, weeks, months, or even years or decades, eventually they're likely to split off. Now, sometimes they may reconverge again. And it's parting is bittersweet. One of the worst things for me has always been moving on, has always been losing a friend, losing a loved one, not from death, but from, or I guess you could say death. I've never, other than my dad, I've never really experienced any bad situations with death, but I've always had a hard time with the ending of things, the ending of relationships. Obviously, the biggest moment of my life was the ending of my divorce. My ex-wife was my best friend. She was my best friend for 7.5 years. She was my partner in crime. She was my teammate. I had a hard time when that relationship ended because not only did it end, but I desperately wanted to remain friends, because it sucks to know you waste all that time and you don't even get a friendship out of it. And that really sucks for me. Like, not me personally, just in my viewpoint, that's one of the shitty things for me. I hate to think that all that time was a waste. But then I have to stop, and here's a chance to use the doctrine of impermanence. It wasn't a waste. That relationship, as all relationships do, have a beginning and a middle and an end. Things ebb and they flow. They ebb and they flow. They're constantly in a state of flux. And you can appreciate the time you have with someone when you're having it without becoming possessive of it, without becoming dependent upon it, because that's where you run into the bad things. When you're dependent on another person, and I'm not saying that you need to keep people at arm's length, but what I'm saying is, like with my ex-wife, it's the only time in my life I've ever experienced this. I would regularly think to myself, if she ever died, I don't know what I'd do. I'd be lost without her. Never felt like that about anyone before. I've never felt like that about anyone since. And I don't know that it's necessarily a feeling that's healthy to have, because isn't that against the natural order of things? Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And becoming dependent on someone, putting your everything into someone, is taking something away from yourself. It's giving power to them and expecting something, expecting a permanence that doesn't necessarily exist. It's the same thing with a friendship. Friends come into our lives and friends fade. It's easier at times when friends fade, because I can think of plenty of people I used to be incredibly close with that I don't even talk to anymore. My whole time growing up, I had a friend named Luke who was basically a brother to me. We, pretty much from grade school, elementary school, all the way up to even after college, we were thick as thieves. We barely talk now. I wish him no ill will. I don't believe he wishes me any ill will. His life went one way, his path went one way, my path went the other. Wasn't wasted time? Not at all. I cherish the times I had with him. When I see him, we can spark up a conversation as if we never stopped talking. But again, it's these situations, it's this understanding that we're walking our path in life, and we have to own our path and love our path and understand that sometimes our path will intersect with people, and sometimes those paths will branch off, and maybe they come back and maybe they don't. And that's okay. You accept it for what it is. You don't try to turn it into something that it's not. Don't become attached. And when I say don't become attached, I'm not saying don't love or care about anything. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm saying you should love more, you should care more, but don't selfishly latch onto something and try to make it last longer than it's going to last. It is as weird as that sounds, but it's the truth. It's going to have an ebb and a flow. And don't force it to be something or to last longer than it needs to be forced. And it's a great way to move on after a breakup or after a divorce or after losing a friend, when you stop and you think to yourself, yeah, it sucks they're not around anymore. It sucks we couldn't be friends. But look at everything I've learned, look at everything I have. And this is the natural order of things. It ebbs and it flows. Their path went in another direction. You wish them the best and you move on. My most recent relationship, that's exactly what happened. Tried and tried and tried to make it work. It didn't work. So, and a lot of that relationship, there were times where it was like I equated it to drowning, to like people in the water. A relationship's typically two people. And so I envisioned it as me as a person and the relationship as a person. And there were so many situations where we were in the water together and the relationship was drowning. And so I was doing everything in my power to pick it up and keep it floating. Well, what happens? Anyone who's ever been a lifeguard, if you dive in and you try to save someone who's drowning, sure, oftentimes, especially if you're good, you can hold them up for a while. But then the more they keep fighting and the more they keep trying to sink, the more energy you have to expend holding it up, the more likely you are going to get tired. And there will come a point where either you let so in this case, we're talking about the relationships of a person, where either you let the drowning person go and either they swim or they sink, or you hold on too long and you both drown. And that's what happened with that relationship. There were times where I was trying to keep it up and it was getting to the point where it's dragging me under, and a decision had to be made, and it sucked and it wasn't fun. And I didn't get to have a friendship out of it, and it sucks. But everything comes and it goes. That's just the way it is. And you can fight against it, and you can be pissed about it, and you can rage against it. But that's just dumb, because it doesn't change the fact that everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's that fighting against the way the world is. It's that holding up the drowning person. It's that hating the fact that, in my case, hating the fact that I couldn't be friends with them. What's the point of hating it? What's the point of trying to force something that is not there? You just have to accept it for what it is and move on. Cherish it for the time it was in your life and then move on. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. It's not. But it is the only way to move on with life. So you just got to remember that, what did we say? You got to remember that relationships are transient. They last only for a short time. They're impermanent. They're evanescent. They soon pass out of sight, memory, and existence. They're quickly fading or disappearing. And they're inconsistent. They're frequently changing. They're variable. They're irregular. Now, that's not, I'm sure people could come back and say, well, I know people who've been together forever. Fantastic. But guess what? It's still going to end, because they're both going to die at some point. It's just the way it is. I'm not saying you go out there and you just give up on everything. But what I'm saying is if something has run its course, let it run its course. Once that course is done, once that process is completed, let it go. Cherish the time you had. Love the person. Care about the person. Wish the person the best, and move on with your life. So finally, the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up here today is I want to talk about how we can use the law, or the doctrine of impermanence, to change our perspective on life, to really be able to use it to learn to embrace life and just to come to terms with the way the world is. So for me, I think of situations where, okay, so I'm always going to have people, one of my biggest problems has always been a fear of abandonment. It's just something that I still carry around with me. I hate feeling like I've been left behind. But if I change my perspective to understand if I really take this doctrine of impermanence and I bring it into my being and I understand it and I truly understand it and I implement it in my life, then when I have these interactions with people or places or things, I can learn to love and cherish and fill my heart with all those positive things for the time that I have these things in my life without trying to artificially hold on to them longer than they need to be. One great example, one great lesson of this is if you've ever had pets. So I have had pugs. My pets have always been pugs. I have 2 pugs now. I'm sure there's been a few episodes where you've heard weird sounds in the background. Chances are that's one of them. I've got 2 pugs. I've got Luna. She is my black pug. She is going to be 10 this year. And I've got Navi. She's my fawn pug. And I don't remember how old Navi is. I think she's like 4 or 5 now. But before them, I had my first pug who was named Nina. I loved her to death. She was the best friend I ever had. And I had Nina for, I believe, 11 years. And one day she was here and the next day she was gone. And it was hard. It was very hard. But I still think back and I cherish every moment I had with her. And then, right after Nina died, I got Luna, and I've had Luna since. And I'm sure when Luna passes, Luna was the first pug I've ever had from a puppy up. So losing her is probably going to be even harder than losing Nina. But in between, I had another pug named Magda. And Magda was just little ball of energy. She was amazing. She used to sleep on my shoulders. It was the cutest thing. Well, she had an undiagnosed heart problem and she died on her second birthday suddenly, right on the 4th of July, or right before her second birthday. And it was heartbreaking. I don't know if my ex-wife ever really fully got over it because she died with me driving 90 miles an hour in the pouring rain, trying to get her to the vet because we didn't understand what was happening. And she died right there, like 2 minutes before we pulled into the vets. It's times like that where you really start to learn about the doctrine of impermanence, because here are these animals, and anyone who knows me, I'm very empathic, and we're going to do a whole episode at some point on force sensitivity, and we're going to talk about that because I'm a very empathic person. But my empathy kicks to a whole nother level when it comes to animals. I love animals far more than I love people. Dogs specifically. There is something about their pureness, their innocence, the love that they have that is just, to someone like me, it's on a whole nother level. And it's rough because I think to myself a lot, like when you lose a pet, you think to yourself, I can't go through that again. I can't. So a lot of people just don't get pets anymore because they can't deal with the heartache of when you lose the animal. And I felt that way too. And every time I've always gotten another one because, especially, Magda's a great choice. We only had her barely 2 years. Her life was just starting when it ended suddenly. Literally suddenly. I don't want to tell the story because it's really sad, but she had just started to live her life, and just like that, it was taken away. And I think back on it and I cherish every moment with that little fatty. Like, I miss her. I love her. And I enjoy the place in my life that she had for the time that she had it. And it's kind of taking that concept that you learn being a pet owner who's lost a pet, but you take that and you apply it to everything. So if you have a job you really like, and maybe one day you don't like it anymore, maybe one day you lose it, you understand that nothing's permanent. Enjoy it while you have it. If you're, one of the things, and I'm getting older, I'm 36 now, I don't have the strength I used to have. Part of it's because I don't work out as much as I used to, but things are harder when you get older. And it's kind of understanding that as we get older, we're going to lose some of the stuff that we could do when we were younger. And you can fight against it, and you can fight as long as you want, and really just kind of, refuse to accept that is an aspect of life. Or you can love it while you have it, understand that it will not be forever, and cherish it once it's gone without trying to keep it around longer than it needs to be. And there's so many ways in life, and it's little corrections. People often ask me, or and not even ask me, they'll just talk to me like, hey, I'm having a hard time. And I try to explain to people that like you can get out of things with subtle changes to how you perceive the world. And this is one of these little life hacks, if you want to use that term, that can allow you to deal with life on a whole other level by understanding that everything has that beginning, middle, and end, that the present is constantly in flux and that nothing is forever. And if you understand that and you really embrace it, it allows you to love more fiercely. It allows you to have compassion, and it allows you to move on without carrying around all of that survivor's guilt or carrying all that anger and bitterness. It just allows you to move on with your life, and that's so important, especially in our world today. So that's all I've got about the Doctrine of Impermanence. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about. It's something that I think is important to remind myself about, and I wanted to share with you all. So just a quick recap of everything we've got going on. So I know I mentioned this before. I've got a two-parter episode that I'm planning behind the scenes on the Force. I'm going to do the first episode will be on the living Force, so focusing on Qui-Gon Jinn and the concept of the living Force, which is living in the moment, trusting your instincts. And that'll be, I'm bringing on a fellow podcaster by the name of Adam Walton. He's kind of like a bit of a podcasting legend. He's been doing this a long time. He's a life coach, just a real knowledgeable guy. He's going to be on. We're going to do the living Force together. And then the second part is going to be on the unifying Force. And I'm bringing on another really talented, just, real experienced podcaster, Brandon Hanley, who runs the podcast Spiritual Dope. Adam Walton, who's doing the living Force, he runs the Mental Mastery Alliance, which is a podcast. And then Brandon Hanley runs Spiritual Dope, which is also a podcast. And he's going to do the unifying Force with me. And we're going to talk about the interconnectivity of life. It's going to be a two-parter, so it'll be released likely 1 week apart. And because again, they're both on the Force, just different aspects of it. Really excited for that. I've got them. I think I've got them both locked in for scheduling. I don't know exactly when they're going to release. They'll release once they're both recorded. Additionally, coming up soon, I've got an episode coming up where I'm bringing in an artist friend of mine, and we're going to talk about cryptozoology. That's going to be a real interesting episode because I know almost nothing about cryptozoology. So I'm going to learn as much as you guys are as well. I've got the PTSD episode where we're going to talk about how tabletop gaming has helped combat PTSD. Got that in the works. Just all kinds of stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. Got a bunch of these single episodes planning. Again, if you guys have not jumped onto the Facebook, please do. It's really starting to grow. I think I'm up to 220 likes, which I'm sure that doesn't sound like a lot to a lot of people, but like my personal Facebook, I've got 80 friends. So it's growing. It's growing. I'm just really excited to get the message out there. Sci-Fi Valley Con is coming up. I think we're in, let's see, let me check the calendar here. We are in holy crap, we're in 3 weeks, almost a little less than 3 weeks at this point. So that's super exciting. Doing a panel there. So if you're in the Altoona, Pennsylvania area, highly encourage you guys to stop down. I'm going to do a Gray Path panel, kind of do a live Q&A. Should be a lot of fun. Plus Saber Soul is going to be there. I did this recording on Sunday night. We did a practice this morning. Fantastic fights, really coming along. Super. This fight is going to be, it's 4 people. It's a 2-on-2. All kinds of different styles. I'm fighting with a classical fencing rapier style, a lot of graceful circular movements. We've got one guy who's fighting with an inverted single sword style, another fighting with that large kind of a 2-handed, heavier Flamberg style. These are all lightsabers. And then one of our members is fighting a Screama style, so it's 2 short blades. All kinds of cool, just the whole fight. I can't wait to show everybody. The fight's really coming together. It's a lot of fun. If you happen to show up to Sci-Fi Valley Con, we're going to be doing that fight. I think we decided 4 times at the con. We're going to do it once on Friday, twice on Saturday, once on Sunday. So just a lot of stuff in the works. Make sure if you haven't jumped over the Facebook page, please jump over there, give us a like, give me a follow if you have any questions, or if you just want to talk, man. I love engagement, man. Shoot me a message on the Facebook or shoot me an email. You can reach me at seekthegraypath@gmail.com. Of course, always jump over to the YouTube page. Please give me a like and subscribe. We're on Instagram. Just lots of stuff in the works. If you guys have some fandoms you want me to explore, I'm super into exploring things I don't know. Case in point, we're doing an episode on cryptozoology. I don't know anything about that. So as always, I'm your host, Tony B, and I hope you are all safe out there.